So I am here with author Lewis Kelley. He has recently announced the release of the re-release of his book Foreign Son, which is a riveting historical page turner with a message of grit and resilience for today. Um, how are you doing today?
I am good, sir. How are you?
I'm excellent. So what gave you the inspiration for the book? Um, Foreign Son, it's a book about World War II. It's historical. I imagine there had to be a lot of research involved.
Absolutely. There's a ton of research involved, and it's still ongoing because it's actually a franchise of a novel. It's going to go on for a long period of time. This is just the first installment. The sequel's out. It's called Flight. Been out, and there's other editions I'm working on as well. What prompted me to go into it was I'm an ex-soldier myself. I'm a veteran, retired firefighter here in Denver. Yes, thank you. What prompted me to go into it was when I love to read. I always have been a person who loved literature, etc. Started trying to find some stories, our stories, and I found a great deal of work that was for factual reasons. I didn't find a lot of fiction highlighting the contributions of people. And the thing I always tell people about fiction, that there are elements of truth in every work of fiction. So obviously the timeline, the events, etc., that surround the story have to be accurate. I wanted to pay homage to all of the service members, not just Black people. There are women throughout this book because a lot of people don't understand how the roles that women played in the war. I wanted to tell the story in a holistic sense that I hadn't seen done because I wanted to portray Vince LaSalle as my main character. He's my protagonist. I wanted to portray Vince not only in his culture, but also as he navigated the world, the greater culture. Because a lot of times we don't live in a homogenous world where we're only inside our own little world and we don't exist outside it. So I wanted to show Vince as kind of an everyman. I wanted to do something different with this story, so I started writing. I started researching, I started writing, designed his character, his flaws, as well as his strengths around a character who could be anyone, actually. Sometimes, a lot of times we're stereotyped as people. And I definitely wanted to fight that reality.
Most definitely. And, I think one of the interesting things about the book is set in World War II.
Yes.
It's a period obviously there's segregation at that time, in the military, which you address in the book. And he's an African-American soldier. So he has to deal with a lot of other obstacles as well. Could you talk a little bit about that and how you dealt with being historically accurate?
Yes, boy, you talk about research. I read some of the events around what people dealt with. I have to give credit to people who are their strength is incredible. To be able to navigate that world, and then you're actually working and fighting for a country where you're a partial citizen, and they're asking you to go to war, potentially give your life, and you don't even enjoy full citizenship rights. So for me not to talk about that dichotomy would have been almost criminal. So that's actually a very large feature of the book. I didn't want that to be the only point because, like I said, Vince is an everyman. I want him to overcome those obstacles just like we do today. That's why I say it's a story that resonates today. It is heart-wrenching to read some of the stories of soldiers who gave their all. They fought, they came home. Some were actually murdered. There's talk about beatings and being ostracized. Not pleasant to read about, not pleasant to learn about. I knew offhand, but when I actually got the factual information, put some names to some of the events that I'd read about and heard about, this is devastating. And to think that's their place in this society, this country, and they overcame that in a tremendous way. Like I said, it would have been criminal not to talk about it. I had to because it was such a pivotal part of the story. I can go into some details about some of the things that I read about some of the soldiers dealt with. you know, a gentleman who came home down south and ends up getting blinded because they ground a police officer ground his billy club into his eyes until he blinded him, took out both his eyes. This is a soldier, and some people didn't like the fact that he was wearing a uniform and had some medals on his chest.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
horrific. Also in the book, you set like, his hometown of being Harlem, New York,
Yes.
and he has a love interest, Berna Lillis. And
Yeah.
this is like, some obstacles of her own. Like, how did you decide to set like, his hometown being like Harlem? Like, what was the reason behind that?
Well, I can segue into the future installments that are coming. The Harlem Renaissance took place shortly after that, but I wanted to play on the Depression as well. New York was a great setting for that. It's a cosmopolitan city where not only African Americans, a lot of people, I mean, Italian Americans, Irish Americans, etc., they exist inside this huge conglomerate, the city, but they also have their own small communities. And I thought Harlem was a great place to set Vince so that I can play off of some of that later, some of the things I do with this this series, like I said. Vince is a complicated, very complex individual. And you'll learn more about him as we go through the series. But even in this series, I introduce you to a lot of small things and people may not catch yet, but I will reflect back on them later. So New York was my setting that I needed in order to form this character that I visualize in my mind.
Man, I applaud you for your work, like, because I think like, it's important, like, to have these conversations, even though it's a book of fiction, I think like World War II is such an important generation. And it's like, it'll get to a point where there won't even be any World War II veterans that we can actually speak with. If like, we haven't reached that. Did you actually talk to like any World War II veterans, like, for research purposes for the book?
I have spoken to some, and I've actually heard from some who read the book afterwards, when it first came out. Yeah, I have. That was one that you asked earlier about what was my inspiration. One of the things I noted was that these men and women are passing away. There's very few of them left. Right. So I wanted to get this book out before that happened. Actually, we don't have any more. There's very few still with us. So yes, I did talk to some. I knew some. I'm related to some who fought in the war. And I did have a chance to talk to them and speak to them. It's very difficult with soldiers, as you can imagine, to go back to that place. And a lot of them are reticent. They don't want to do that. They don't want to talk about the war, what they went through, what they had to do to survive, to come home. So it's a really difficult subject to approach sometimes. But I did get to hear from some people. Yes.
That's amazing. Like, that you got that opportunity. What's next for you? Like, with the Foreign Son series, like,
Well, as I said, this, if you can see, this is the sequel, Flight. It's out. So if you read the story and you haven't read it, it's a cliffhanger. So I left you hanging as a reader, but I got something for you to follow up. So it's there for you. What's next is Vince is in the middle of a mission when Foreign Son ends, and I have to complete that mission. So I take you through that story. I take you forward into dealing with the people he's dealing with, as far as his compatriots and the people he's battling. He goes into a world of espionage. Used to soldiers fighting on a battlefield, but I take Vince into the world of espionage, which exists behind the scenes, to portray a different side of the story. And really, this is a human story. I had one reviewer tell me this book is more about the backdrop. The war is a backdrop. This is about the human characters, their interactions, which is really what I was trying to portray. I was very happy to hear that from this person. That we're talking about the human toll that war takes on you, the human interactions, the relationships that are developed and that you have to navigate. That's really what I wanted to be the focus, and hopefully that's what I captured. I've heard from people that's what I did. The characters in this book, which there are many characters. They're English, they're French, they're Scottish, they're Canadian, they're Australian, they're American, of course. Each of the main characters gets their own feature. There's a young woman named Elise who's a British double agent. I'm working on her story now. It's going to be entirely complex. If you know who Elise is in the book, I'm not going to give away too much because Elise does something. I mean, she's incredible. And the inspiration for Elise was finding out the role that women played and what happened to them. We know about Rosie the Riveter. Women took over the jobs at home. We know about the Waves, which were the nurses and et cetera, who went to and who took care of people. But these women were spies. The Russians had all-female tank crews that fought on the front lines. Other people are not as hesitant to put women in combat roles as Americans are. And I wanted to pay homage to these women and highlight their contributions, but also their difficulties, their bravery, their intelligence, their grit. There's some incredible stories out there about what women did during the war. I talk about spies. One of the most wanted spies by the Nazis was a female. She was so effective at what she did. They knew who she was. They basically put a hit out on her. They could never capture her. And she went throughout the war performing her duty. You know, I'm not going to give away her story because I want people to look this stuff up. Look this up. These are the people we come from. These are what people did. She happened to be white. And one of the things I portray in this book, like I said, this is not a story that's strictly African-American. Most of my characters in this book are Caucasian. If you look at it, and if you do a count, it's like 5 to 15, you know? And I have Latino characters I haven't introduced yet. I have a Japanese character who's a Nisei, which is the second generation of Japanese who fought in the war. And as we know, the Japanese were in internment camps during World War II. They were pulled out of internment camps or volunteered to go fight in the war. Here their families are locked up in the United States and they go to war to prove their citizenship. You know, their property was confiscated. You're in California. One of the worst examples was people's property being taken. And most of that was never returned. You're talking about generational wealth, people having to rebuild. You know, I had an opportunity to have a conversation with a young man who's a descendant of a Japanese World War II veteran. And there's always this saying, I would always read this about the Japanese. Well, they just keep quiet. They keep quiet and they persevere and they just go on and they don't complain. Okay. I think we do that to some extent as well. So I had a chance finally to talk to someone who was of Japanese heritage, whose grandfather had fought in the war. And he was not quiet at all. He was highly upset that his generational wealth had been taken from him. Their property had been confiscated. It was never returned. So basically they're starting from zero again, just like many people have to do. So the stereotypical answer that, you know, Asian people are stoic, they just persevere, they're quiet, they don't complain. This young man disproved that to me in person. He was not happy at all that his people had to do that. And of course he continued on with his life. You don't have a choice but to continue on. Right. Every one of us is in that position. It's not that we complain, acknowledge what happened. If you can, make it right, but at least acknowledge it in a historical sense so that we can change and get better as people and as a nation. You know, that's why I say this story resonates today, because we have people trying to change curriculums, historical facts. They don't want them taught. Nobody's saying that this is how we operate still in every case. But you can't change facts. This is what happened. If people were disadvantaged, okay, let's admit that. Let's try to do better. We're not going to wallow in pity. We have no choice but to stand up and try to push forward. Of course we're going to do that. But let's acknowledge that maybe we're overcoming something that somebody else didn't have to, okay?
Most definitely.
So,
Author Lewis Kelley,
get to that level playing field we all want. That's why I say this story resonates again. That's why this story resonates today. Yeah.
Thank you so
much. I'm preaching a little bit.
Taking the time, man. I appreciate it. You know, the author of Foreign Son. Where can people check out your work? What's your website?
AuthorLewisKelley.com.
Definitely. Thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate you.
You too, Ryan. I appreciate you being patient with me, and I'm sorry I messed up the time again. And I do thank you that we were able to pull it off today.
Most definitely. Anytime.
All right. You too.